Coming up next on the SPNN Forum, I'm speaking with Seitu Jones of Create the Community Meal. That's next on the SPNN Forum. Seitu, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so glad you could join us. As you know, I'm a huge fan of the work you've been doing. I was part of the Create the Community Meal. Mm-hmm. Tell us briefly, what is this big project that you've just partially completed? You did the big show.
Right. On September 14th, we prepared a meal for 2,000 people at a table 1/2 mile long that focused on healthy eating, right in the middle of Victoria Street in Frogtown.
Fantastic. I had heard about it for maybe 2 years.
That's right.
There was a tremendous amount of build-up for. I mean, you just set your course to do it. You've been dreaming about it, I'm sure, much longer than that. And even while I was thinking about it, I could not imagine what it felt like to stand there on the morning of. How hard was it to picture what it would actually feel like to do that whole half-mile stretch of an urban street?
You know, I had always envisioned being able to stand. There's a little rise on Victoria Street. Part of the reason we chose Victoria Street is because it's relatively flat.
Okay.
But it does have this little rise on it. And I had always had this vision of being able to stand on that rise and look down the street and see all of these volunteers bringing this food to the table and then seeing everybody eating. I didn't get a chance to do that because I ended up being one of the table hosts.
I hadn't heard that.
And you had mentioned dreaming about this.
Yeah.
For over 2 years, thanks to the Joyce Foundation and Public Arts St. Paul, the Joyce Foundation is based in Chicago, and every year they give out 4 Joyce Awards to artists in the Great Lakes regions. And that allowed me 2 years to plot and plan this thing, to work on the logistics, to work with farmers, with artists, to do all of that. And so initially it was research and reflection. And then as it got closer and closer, the dreams sometimes turned into anxiety.
I had it for you because I've done big events too, but never one that big.
Yeah.
And nothing like that one because it's a completely unique project. Is there anything been done like it that you modeled it off
and
of?
part of my research was spent looking at other precedents all over the world, and so folks have done long tables all over. You know, but not too many that focused on the theme of healthy eating. Mm-hmm. And for a while, there were people that said, well, you should try and break the Guinness World Book of Records. And I thought about that for about 10 minutes, but then it would have taken everything away from this focus on healthy eating as we tried to break the record. But, you know, we may have. Because the thing that I found is when I looked at these long tables in California, in Italy, and in France, was that each one of them claimed to break a record. So you could have the world's longest dinner table, the world's longest lunch table, the world's longest table with, you know, all local foods. I mean, all of that. So like, you know, it gets so specific and esoteric that we would have spent way too much time on. But there were many precedents. In addition, this was an opportunity for an artist to to really make an intervention in the food system. And and I built on the work of many other artists that had done the same thing.
Let's drill down a little bit into that word intervention in the food system, because I'd like you to go back to some of where the idea of food and that importance of good, of good food, where that comes from, and what's missing.
Yeah, you know, this idea came from several different sources. You know, really short stories, and I'm not going to go on, and I won't go on and on, but one story takes place outside of my studio windows. My wife and I live in a restored storefront in Frogtown, and we live upstairs and my studio space is downstairs. And so when I open up the blinds to my studio, I would see an endless parade of my neighbors walking by in one direction and coming back just a few minutes later with bags of groceries, knowing they had just shopped at the local convenience store. And then a few years after I started seeing that trend, and I've really been seeing that over the last almost 20 years that we've been there. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I am a member of a group of African-American environmentalists called Afro-Eco. And we applied for and received a grant from the USDA, working with 3 other nonprofit organizations that focus on food, to do an assessment, asking people in community planning districts 7 and 8 and 4 and 5 up in Dayton's Bluff, asking these folks a question: what are the obstacles that prevent you from making healthy food choices? And so, of course, the first thing that came up was cost. And we knew that and kind of expected that to happen. Now, I maintain really it's more the perception of cost, because those cheap calories that I saw people coming back from the convenience store with will cost you more in the long run, because they aren't as good for you as those whole or healthy calories. But cost was one of the biggest obstacles. Right after that, people said they were intimidated by making healthy food choices. And these are my neighbors. And probing a little bit deeper, folks said they didn't know how to cook, didn't know how to prepare healthy food or fresh ingredients. You know, so that was another thing. The last thing is, you know, I am a child of the 60s and 70s. And I was a member of the Black Arts Movement, which was a cultural component to the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement, and where we did posters and flyers as an artist for performances, did set design, I mean, all kind of stuff in the service of the community, however we described it. And I was deeply impacted by the Black Panther Party. And one of the things, and people have a lot of different
a lot of negatives. They may have some pretty negative ones.
They do, of the Black Panther Party.
perhaps.
But one of their biggest and greatest legacies is the free breakfast program.
Really?
That began in Oakland and then spread to every city where there was a Black Panther Party chapter.
Really?
And so at one point in time, there were over 10,000 kids being served by this free breakfast program. And they were doing that because they understood that to have a progressive and healthy community, you had to have good nutrition.
Yeah.
And so all of those things mixed up and combined to really end up, you know, at the end of this thing, doing this free meal to my neighbors as a demonstration of what a healthy meal could be.
Really exciting. You know, when you talk about shopping at the convenience store, I walk into those, having grown up in Iowa with always cooking and always having good food. for me, I walk in there and it feels like a death zone for me. I literally, my whole body looks around and I think, this can't be food. That's not I don't see it as food.
Yeah.
And it's, to me, just not a place I want to go. So I have an immediate reaction. That's not necessarily the reaction other people have.
Right.
It's convenience.
Right.
We haven't learned how disconnected we are from food that is closer to the ground, literally. And we're maybe making choices that actually, as you said, I can eat a very high-calorie hamburger from a fast food store and actually be hungry almost immediately afterward, which seems really disconnected because I know how many calories I just consumed.
Exactly.
But I don't feel sustained and I don't feel full. At this table, I was there as a volunteer. I got to be a table host. I really felt the connection to the neighborhood in a way I'd never felt it before.
Yeah.
I want to share that. It's hard to explain how I felt because I just started to see people in a different way because I was hanging out there for longer than I've ever hung out there. I was on the street from 8 in the morning till 3 or 4 in the afternoon and seeing all the disconnections. Tell us a little bit about the door knocking and the awareness that you had to do to talk to your neighbors, because this conversation really had to be intense to picture how angry we get when there are a few orange cones in front of our spaces. And you closed all their streets. It was how many closed streets?
There were 8 closed intersections along that half mile.
Yeah. And lots of people in their neighborhood. And tables with big white cloths down them, and people setting tables, and food trucks and latrines. And
That's true. That's true. And one of the things that you mentioned is also the kind of logistics.
The logistics were phenomenal.
And there's no way that I could have done that by myself.
Clearly.
That could have only happened with the producing organization, Public Arts St. Paul.
Definitely.
And Public Arts St. Paul hired a producer to work with me. And we had an army of volunteers that were helping to manage the 432 volunteers that we had on the street that day. But going back to your comment about being on the street.
The logistics, I will say, it's not a very interesting topic, and that's why I don't want to. However, for anyone trying to picture this, it was way bigger than any wedding.
Oh, I could go
on and on talking about the details and some of the details that we had to fret over.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Even. There were times when working with Chef James Baker, where we spent a couple of weeks going back and forth a portion size. Should it be 3 ounce or 4 ounce? And then we ended up at 3 ounce, and then went back to 4 ounce. And recognizing that 1 ounce on an individual's plate ended up being 150 pounds worth of vegetables all the way down the line.
Yeah.
And, so that was
had to be physically moved. I was trained how to hold my tray.
Well, and that's something too I want to come back to. I wanted to have a supper time conversation about food, and about food in my neighborhood in particular. And that's what I mean about having this be an intervention in the food system, to have us focus on that. And so as a table host, we even gave folks a set of prompts and questions to ask to keep the conversation going around food. It didn't always go there, and sometimes it went way out into the Vikings, because it was also the opener of the Vikings. So all of that stuff happened, but all of those are dinner time conversations. And I wanted that to happen with folks in my neighborhood and folks from outside of my neighborhood. So with full intention, I wanted to make sure that for this food event, that over half the folks there at the table would be from the neighborhood.
Okay.
And because I knew that once we opened this thing up in the digital sphere, or however the word got out, that would fill up right away.
Exactly. Hold that thought. If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Seitu Jones about Create the Community Meal. And I really appreciated that I really decided I wanted to be not just sitting at the table, I wanted to participate. That was important to me personally because I thought I would get a better experience and I would feel more connected to all the elements of what you were doing, because I don't want to lose track of the artistry that you put into it, the artistry, the relationships, the quality of the food, the intentionality, the prayer and blessings, the beginning and the ending of things. There were all these beautiful elements to it. And but what I was also so aware of was the chaos.
Oh yeah.
In spite of but it was a different chaos than I expected. I think that's what interested me so much, was that it was the part of who's actually going to sit at my table. And I think one of the things you may have learned was how long it took you to go up and down the whole block.
Man.
It was a long walk.
Yeah, you know, there were so many little elements, and there were a lot of things, a lot of small things that kind of went wacky, but nothing big and nothing major.
Nothing big.
One of the things that we just didn't think all the way through, well, a couple things. Well, first, we always knew that there were going to be people that would show up anyway, and folks in our neighborhood. But even going back to your question about door knocking, we flyered the entire neighborhood, all of Frogtown. On either side of Victoria, we went out door knocking 4 different times, flyering, getting people to sign the petition
just
to close the
get
street.
The permission to get the, you have to get 60% of all people on the block to sign the petition.
on like 8 streets going
That's a
up
lot
there.
of people.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, that was a trip. But that was something that we knew that we were going to have to do if we were going to have folks there at the table. And even knowing that, we also knew and understood that there were going to be people who didn't get the word, people who lived just a few feet away from the meal and from the table and still didn't get word.
Right.
You know, and one of the things that we should have emphasized more to our table hosts was that if you saw folks asked a question and there were empty seats at your table, to invite folks to sit.
Yeah.
You know, that was one of the things, because we had this system that was really worked out. One of the staff people at Public Arts St. Paul, it was her job to organize every single one of the guests. I mean, that was a trip. And you talk about like sitting down.
Yeah, I know.
And so,
yeah, that was amazing.
Like a
bigger
like
than
a wedding.
any wedding.
Yeah, and so she like sat people at the table, and so like each table host would know. But anyway, saying all that to say is like, you know, there were a lot of things that we might do just a little differently. But we were able to be flexible enough and have folks like yourself who were knowledgeable enough and sensitive enough to do that. You know, so we had almost every single one of those seats filled.
Absolutely.
And filled, like I say, over half of them with folks from the neighborhood.
So you've made this intervention. Lots of people have talked about it. What's a couple of key takeaways, and where do you want to go next?
Well, first of all, I wanted to have this be this indelible memory that was planted in people's heads. How for an afternoon on one Sunday, we all sat down at 250 tables and had this conversation, ate good food. Every now and then it would blow my mind to look up and down the table and see that happening, you know, that entire length.
And the food was, I will just say, beautiful.
It was, and not only aesthetically, but it was very good.
Tasty.
You know, and Chef James was really conscious and aware of that.
And another thing we should mention is that the food didn't travel more than, was it 50 miles or 100 miles?
42 miles
42, because I know it was in Northfield was the farthest.
With the exception of the rice.
The rice.
You know, all of the food came from like within a few miles away. You know, some of the food was literally grown just blocks away that was on our table. You know, and so this was also an opportunity for people to meet their farmers. So there were all of these relational things that we set out to happen. But this does have a legacy beyond this.
Definitely.
One of the organizing tools that we use were doing a set of small community meals, neighborhood meals. We received a small grant from Blue Cross Blue Shield to actually pay people, pay neighbors, to buy food or even have the food catered and invite neighbors to their homes as a way of putting out the word for this thing. Also collecting food stories. I didn't even talk about that. I've been collecting food stories along the way. And so one of the legacies will be continuing these small meals that we're having. I had no idea about the response, and that was the thing that excited us all, is that over and over again, people that came to these small meals said, God, there was a great opportunity to sit down with my neighbor. I hadn't been in my neighbor's house before, or my neighbor's yard, and so we're going to continue that. Another legacy, and this is one of the things that we began on this road, is we have designed and are fabricating, or almost completed now, a set of mobile kitchens that will end up going to 2 youth-oriented organizations that deal with food. And they will be demonstration kitchens so that they will first cook for the people in their program, but they will also take these things out to parking lots, parks, family picnics, street parties, or block parties.
Fabulous.
And do demonstration, do cooking right there on the spot with these things. So that's another one of the legacies that'll happen.
Oh, I love that,
Yeah.
because that is really extending that notion that food is a community.
Oh, absolutely. And food, and as this thing goes on, I've gotten all kind of requests from people across the country, across the world, to do a community meal.
Oh, my.
And the thing I tell folks is that it's local, it's all about local. Working with Public Arts St. Paul and hopefully working with the Minnesota Historical Society Press, we're going to produce a document, but that document will be more like a manual, more like a how-to, how to do this in your community. And Chef was telling me, and this is something that I'd really like to explore, he's gotten some requests to do some in North Minneapolis, and we've thought about these meals in North Minneapolis as being more dinners around peace. To go in some of the areas where there have been these violent flare-ups, and get folks to sit down and talk and break bread.
One of the things I want to make sure you have a second to say is that there's an opportunity to support what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, see, I can go on and on and on.
But we have just another second. So,
Yeah.
so there's a crowdsource funding.
Yeah, please, yeah. We're still looking to try and balance our books on this.
Okay, how much do you need to raise?
Well, maybe about 12 grand, something like that.
That's pretty darn doable.
Yeah, I think it's just a few days left for our Crowd Tilt campaign.
Okay.
So if you go to Public Arts St. Paul, all one word,
we'll post
/create, and then within that create website, you can find the crowd
fantastic
sourcing funding initiative we're doing.
And I put in a little donation. It's fun and easy to do.
Thank you.
And I do hope that people will continue to appreciate how important it is to have the community meal. That's
Thank you.
all we have time for. Join us again next week on the SPNN Forum.